Welcome back to the podcast series from Hospice Education. I'm Kathy O'Brien and I'm the Clinical Education Team Lead here. And today I'm joined by my colleague Siobhan Workman, who is a practice educator and registered nurse. Welcome, Siobhan.
Thank you.
We both have experience in palliative and end-of-life care, and today we wanted to share some thoughts with you. We're going to talk about a topic that is deeply embedded in palliative care, but actually not always openly addressed, and that's coping with loss as healthcare professionals. Death is an inevitable event, and in healthcare settings, in addition to being crucial sites for treatment and care, they are also environments where loss is met.
I think you're really on the ball there, Kathy. And when we say loss, we're not just talking about patient deaths. We're actually also talking about anticipatory grief, cumulative loss, and the emotional impact of caring for patients and families over time.
Exactly, Siobhan. And this conversation is about how we as clinicians experience grief and how we can acknowledge it and manage it in a sustainable and professional way. So, on that note, let's have a look at defining loss in clinical practice.
Okay, so I think we're looking at something along the lines of in order to provide that quality care, healthcare professionals and patients develop a close relationship which contributes to the uniqueness of the bereavement experience. And one thing that I've noticed as a palliative care nurse is that loss in this setting starts long before a patient dies. We often see patients losing function, their independence deteriorates, and there's a sense of a loss of identity or, their place within the family. And on the subject of families, they begin to grieve these changes in real time too.
That's such an important point. Clinically, we often focus on symptom management and goals of care, but emotionally, we are seeing that series of losses, and actually, we're not immune to that as providers or caregivers.
No, we're not. And I think there's often a misconception about that. Even when we're experienced as healthcare professionals or when death is expected, each patient stands for a unique relationship created. The grief that we experience may be quieter, but it does have the ability to accumulate over time.
So that seems like a good point to move on to look at what we call anticipatory grief and the connection with professional boundaries. If we focus on anticipatory grief for a moment, we usually frame it around patients and families, but actually clinicians experience it too. And particularly when it's someone who we've worked with or we've followed their journey for any length of time, we'll have been present and part of that deteriorating health and actually a growing dependence on us as healthcare professionals and their support network, whether that's immediate family or friends.
You're absolutely right there, Kathy. And we may notice feelings such as sadness, dread, or emotional distancing building up in ourselves as a patient's health deteriorates. And sometimes, unfortunately, those feelings might not surface, but if they do, then this can be seen as a protective distancing tact. But acknowledging them is also a signal that we need to check in with ourselves. We talk about compassion fatigue or burnout, so we need to be mindful of it and ensure that our stress bucket, as we sometimes call it, doesn't start to fill up or indeed overflow.
Yes, and I think that's where professional boundaries often get misunderstood. Acknowledging grief doesn't mean losing objectivity, but actually it helps us to stay present and compassionate without burning
Yeah.
out. If we think about our thoughts around the myth of clinical detachment, Siobhan, do you think there is this unspoken expectation in healthcare that we should be able to compartmentalise indefinitely and that being professional means remaining unaffected?
Yes, I think professional, the word itself just conjures up certain expectations, doesn't it? But actually, the research tells us otherwise. If you think about suppressed grief, this can contribute to burnout, moral distress, and compassion fatigue. Feeling loss actually doesn't mean we're doing our jobs poorly. I think rather it's the opposite. It often means we're doing them well, but it's not recognised. Research done indeed last year, hidden in plain sight, the authors actually talked about the emotional connection established between carers and patients, and they encourage us to think of grief not as a negative experience, but actually as something that can produce positive outcomes, such as increased meaning and purpose, both to us professionally and personally, deeper connection with others, whether that be with our peers, colleagues, or the patients we look after. And for those who are deeply troubled by grief and loss, help in that post traumatic growth period.
And actually, I suppose encouraging conversations around this area within teams can be quite incredibly powerful.
Mm,
Even brief acknowledgements like pausing after a patient's death or checking in during rounds or community home visits can all normalise grief and reduce
mm.
isolation. Okay, so let's have a look at some coping strategies for healthcare professionals. What are your thoughts?
So I think looking at sort of the practical issues and remedies are really so important to us and knowing about them. And these can help staff cope with the loss in palliative care. So what do you think they are, Kathy?
Well, I think one is ritualisation. By that I mean small and intentional actions. It might be something as simple as a moment of silence, writing a patient's name down, or even attending memorial services when
Mm,
available. These acts help create structure, meaning, and closure. And another is peer support. Informal debriefs, interdisciplinary check ins, or reflective practice groups can help clinicians process emotions in a shared, safe space. But we need to recognise that it will be different for everybody.
yes. And there we can't ignore the importance of self awareness, recognizing in ourselves signs of cumulative grief, such as emotional numbing, irritability, or avoidance, which would suggest that our stress bucket is filling up. Knowing these and recognizing them actually allows us to intervene early rather than pushing them away until actually we're depleted and our stress bucket has overflowed. But I think it's really important to emphasize to our listeners out there that actually coping strategies used by healthcare professionals in response to grief and bereavement are unique and multidimensional. So, what would work for you, Kathy, may not necessarily work for me, and vice versa. So, the message to our listeners and for all our health professional colleagues is to find or seek out something that works for you.
Which actually brings us neatly to when to seek additional support. There may come a point where informal coping isn't enough, and that's actually okay, but it's important to recognise this and be open and transparent.
Indeed, Kathy, and I would agree with that and what you just said. If you find that grief is affecting sleep, relationships, whether they be personal or professional ones, where there is an impact on your clinical decision making or your sense of meaning or purpose, seeking professional support is appropriate and the right thing to do. And these can come in many forms, but please do remember and do consider that therapy, counselling, or spiritual care, whichever form your support takes, these aren't signs of weakness. I firmly believe that actually they are extensions of good self care and they highlight professional responsibility.
Absolutely. I'd even argue that attending to our own grief improves patient care. We can show up as more grounded, more attentive, and more emotionally available. Reflecting on life and death can actually help us as healthcare professionals to come to terms with death and make sense of it. There was a study done in 2024 that talked about healthcare professionals using positive reframing to help them cope with the loss of a patient and how it gave meaning to their job roles and assisted them to gain inner strength. I think caring for people at end of life really does transform us. It shapes our values, our relationships, and our understanding of what it means to live well.
And we've always said, we support our families and we support our patients and their support network to live well until they die. So if we just take some time to, reflect on what we've talked about today, both you, Kathy, and I recognise that loss is inherent in palliative care. But I think it's important to state to everyone who's listening that we can't eliminate it, but we can choose how we carry it. And importantly, we don't have to carry it alone. Creating space for grief, personally and within the workspace, is part of actually sustaining what we do and in our practice. Compassion for others begins with compassion for ourselves.
Absolutely. And if you're listening and recognizing yourself in this conversation, know that your experience is shared, valid, and worthy of care. Coping with loss is not a skill to master, it is a practice we return to time and time again. Siobhan, thank you for joining us today. Do you have any final comments you'd like to make?
I'd probably just like to, say to everyone out there that, the time that we spend with patients is individual and it's unique, and they are a learning experience every single time. And, it's a very transient period for us, so embrace it.
Thank you, Siobhan, and thank you everybody for joining us today. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other.